Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. This one is a bit of an urban legend in my town that I think you might get a kick out of. It's a good one to tell around the campfire. It's set in Okinawa. It's about my friend, let's call him Kay. He was a pretty crazy kid when he was younger, but I met him when I was about 18. I had just gotten my driver's license, and he was always trying to convince our gang of friends to go on road trips. He always wanted to go in search of ghosts or to any haunted locations he could. For example, he was known to go into the abandoned air raid shelters alone in the dead of night. I thought it was just a rumor that there were still skeletons in the air raid shelters, but there was truth to the claims. This didn't deter him. I remember that some of the kids at school said that if you took a photo in a certain air raid shelter at around 2 a.m., then you would see a spirit in the photo. Others said if you went swimming at 2 a.m. around the island and had someone take a photo of you, you would see the arms and grasping fingers of those who had met their end in the watery depths reaching for you. If you aren't convinced, you need only remember or research the history surrounding Okinawa in the war. Of course, no one ever had any evidence of these photos to back up the claims, but it was spooky and mildly interesting nonetheless. Kay wasn't scared of anything, and we all admired his guts and spirit. One night, we were all piled into my car just like usual, only we brought along an acquaintance. He was, how can I say, a bit of trouble. That night we were heading to an off-limits wharf he knew about. Seriously, I don't know how I let myself get talked into these situations. We had a kind of mini convoy situation. 2 cars were following mine. The plan was to be close to the water, let off some fireworks, and those who could drink would, while at least 3 of us were left with soft drinks. I had my doubts, but to be honest, it was fun. It was one of those summer nights that you felt you'd never forget. That thought couldn't have been truer, considering the aftermath. Since it was dark by the wharf, we aimed our cars toward the water's edge to make sure that we had enough light. When I say wharf, I don't mean some port filled with boats. This seemed to be someone's private mini-port, and the best thing about it was that there was no boats, and it was really nice. The headlights were working well, everyone was in good spirits, until someone started shouting about someone in the water. We all turned to look, and to my surprise, there were about 5 or 6 people in the water. One looked like it could be a child. Some of the guys said that they couldn't see what we were talking about, but to me, it was plain to see. We panicked, as you might have in this situation. There was an uproar, and then someone shouted that we should go to a nearby house to see if they had a rope or something. It was mayhem in those moments. We were shouting out to the water and shouting at one another. We were just teenagers with no knowledge of how we could help. We had no experience. During these moments of chaos, an old man stumbled his way over from a nearby house. "What are you doing here? This is off limits," he roared. He made me feel like a little kid. Turns out, he was a fisherman. One of my pals were stripping off to jump into the water to try and help, and the old man clamped onto his wrist, then yanked his arm backward. My friend then wrestled to break free from his grasp, shouting all the while completely transfixed. "They're drowning! Even the little one! I have to try and save them!" The old fisherman commanded him to stop. It was so weird because about half of the people with us were still asking us about what we were screaming about. The old fisherman's voice cut through the summer night sky. "Can't you see?" he boomed, and he silenced the lot of us. Of course I could see. The poor people drowning in the water were right before my eyes. He restrained my friend, and at that moment, the tip of his toe reached the wharf's edge, and then he said, "Do they look like they are looking for help?" It dawned on me that no one had heard any screams for help from the water, just the panic from us at shore. We stood in silence watching the waves, and those that could see them in the water were unable to look away. "Look closely, boys. They aren't screaming, are they?" They weren't. No, they were smiling. Yeah, sometimes laughing too. See, people like you who go where you shouldn't get drawn in. They're looking for company. They want you there, so we keep it off limits. Boys, I don't want to see you around here again, okay? And all of us left without a word of complaint, never to return. Those smiling, drowning faces, that was too much.
This was about 28 or 29 years ago, after I graduated from high school and got a job in Saitama. It's a prefecture in Japan which neighbors Tokyo. I got a second-hand car after a couple of months of moving. You really do need one out there. I was glad that I bought one. I used to go on long, relaxing night drives after work and would listen to music and smoke cigarettes. I really enjoyed it. Obviously, that was until the night in question. One night, I was taking a very long drive, way out in the mountains. There wasn't much but darkness and the sound of cicadas all around me. I always drove with the driver's side window down, since I was usually smoking. I was driving along this dark road when I heard a scream. It didn't sound like an adult scream. It sounded like a child's scream. It was blood-curdling. I don't want to talk about it much because I can still hear it in my mind as I type these words. Trust me, if you heard something like that, you would do what I did. I slammed on the brakes. It was instinctive. I wasn't a believer in the paranormal or anything, and I put a lot of faith into my five senses. I pulled over onto the hard shoulder and got out of my car. I felt chills race up my spine, and there was no reason why I should have heard what I heard. My car's headlights lit up the dark woods ahead of me, but there was nothing but darkness in all directions. I began to sweat. I was worried, scared, nervous, paranoid, you name it. I was overcome by some terrible dread. What made that sound? Was someone in danger? My legs began to tremble. I thought that was just a thing that people would say, but I found out that it is very true. I couldn't hear anything apart from my own heartbeat and the restless shuffle of my feet on the dirt road beneath them. I was panicked. I managed to convince myself that it was just an auditory hallucination. Maybe I was staying up too late or something. I didn't hear anything else after the initial scream, so I thought I would just get out of there and head home. About 3 weeks later, I was watching the TV, and the same roads and mountain passes come up on the screen. The newscaster then said something that I will never forget. Satomu Miyazaki has confessed to the murder and has identified the scene of the crime to the authorities. The case had already proceeded to the courts, therefore I knew that the scream that I heard was not happening in real time. Perhaps it was some distant echo from the past. That scream wasn't one you would hear in an amusement park or if someone startled somebody else. It was an end-of-life scream. It was truly disturbing to imagine what happened there. I didn't have to use my imagination much, since this man's actions were very well documented. If you don't want to sleep tonight, then you can look up the crimes of Satomu Miyazaki, and you'll understand why that scream frightened me so much. What he did truly turns my stomach. After that night, I stopped going for night drives in the woods.
Before my final year of college, I decided during that summer break, this being 2003, that I wanted to go on a road trip across the United States. I would use this opportunity to see the various landmarks and even visit some family and friends along the way. For context, this story comes from the perspective of a female who at that time was 22 years old. One day on this road trip, I had woken up super early, about 5 a.m., and by the time it was 8 p.m., I was super exhausted. And fortunately at that point, I was in the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma, with the next city not being for at least 50 miles. I was going to just deal with it and drive, but I was struggling to stay awake. No coffee and no sleep does that to you. Well, lucky for me, there was a rest area coming up in a few miles, so why not park there and take a little nap? I'll be up before you know it, I told myself as I made a decision and looked forward to my break. As I reached the exit sign that would lead me to the rest area, I noticed that it's just one small building with really cheap lights. Next to the building, off in the field behind it, was this medium-sized rock-like formation. It was about 1 story tall. At the building where the restrooms are, I could also see a couple of vending machines. I made sure to park right next to the restroom entrance, and when I stepped out, I swear to you, I almost stepped on a used needle. That was the last thing that I needed happening to me, especially in the middle of nowhere. I now made sure to watch my step, avoiding the trash, and I walked up to the vending machine so I could buy myself a water bottle. At this very moment, I ended up hearing a noise. It sounded like footsteps shuffling and running off, if that makes any sense. I turned my attention behind me, alarmed by this sudden disturbance, and I stared off into the night for a solid 20 seconds. "Hello? Is someone there?" I called out, but there was no answer. Well, that didn't help, so I just made the assumption that it was the wind moving the trash that scattered all over the floor. And thus, I returned back to my vehicle, water bottle in hand. Thankfully, I now felt a little more safe, but still very exhausted. I sat there in my seat for about 15 minutes, trying to keep my eyes from shutting and debating if I should just leave. But before I knew it, darkness hit me and I had drifted into dreamland. Well, this sleep wouldn't last very long since I was suddenly awoken by something scratching one of my windows. What do you know? One of the scariest sights for me to ever bear witness to. There are 3 large men surrounding me, one on my driver's side, the passenger side, and I could see one in the back through the rearview mirror. The one on my driver's side door has a large knife, and he's trying to open my door by pulling at the door handle. The one on the passenger side has a handgun, and the one at the back has a baseball bat. "Hey, open up, sweetheart. We just want to talk to you." I still recall the one with the large knife telling me, as he keeps trying to convince me to open the door. As you'd expect, I wasn't just going to sit there and allow these random creeps to try and break in. Any sort of sleepiness I had was instantly zapped away as I turned my car on and started to drive away. However, since they were still pretty close to me, the one with the baseball bat hit the back of my vehicle in retaliation for me almost running him over. I obviously had a loss of words now, but I am somewhat relieved that I had gotten away. However, that relief would only last for 20 or so seconds, because what do you know? I can see headlights fast approaching me. It wasn't a random stranger's vehicle in the area. No, it was these creeps who now caught up to me. They drove right alongside me and now I can see their vehicle a bit better. It was one of those typical creeper vans you see and hear about in people's scary stories. The one guy on the passenger side window, I remember him pointing his gun at me and signaling for me to pull to the side of the road. Well, what other choices did I have? I could do just that, or drive away and risk getting shot at. I had to make a decision quickly. So what I did was I said I'm going to put pedal to the metal and floor it as fast as I can, which in itself was already a super risky move. I pull off a Vin Diesel and I start driving upwards of 90 miles an hour, almost approaching 100 miles. And before I realized it, I had lost those creeps. Thank the Lord. Well, I didn't stop even at this good news, as I continued on until I reached the next town and drove over to the police station to report the incident. They did tell me that they would look into it, and while I did stay in town to get my car fixed, I would return back to the police station to see if there were any updates before I left. They had none, which is such a shame. And I left that town, and from that point on, I chose to spend some extra cash and ensured that I stayed in motels and well-populated places. And by the way, I still believe those creeps who tried to break into my car must have been watching me from the cover of the darkness at that rest area. Remember, I didn't see any vehicles at first, and it wasn't until they got closer to me when making my gateway that I could see the kind of vehicle they drove. I still believe that they must have hidden their vehicle behind that rock formation that I had seen. And I also believe the footsteps I heard weren't the wind like I first assumed. It was one of them trying to sneak up on me. They must have changed their mind at the last minute and then chose to hide. I know this had to have been the wrong place at the wrong time, and they chose to come after me when they noticed that I was asleep. And that in itself is just terrifying. This happened a few years ago, but I still remember it as if it was yesterday, and I will never forget what I saw that night. I was at home doing nothing in particular when my friend called. He said he wanted to get out of his house and asked if I wanted to hang out. I thought, why not? This was at about 3 a.m. I'm not even sure why I was still awake, but I was. He said that he would come and pick me up in his car. We were driving around the city for a while, and my friend suddenly said, "Hey, let's go to the wharf." So, that's where we headed. Down by the pier area, by the wharf, there is an old factory. In the daytime, trucks are in and out of there all the time, and it's a pretty busy area. But at night, it was quiet. The roads by the wharf are really wide and straight. On weekend nights, you can sometimes see people racing there. But that night, we were the only ones on the road. It made for a quite tense atmosphere. We headed to the wharf like we were being drawn there. We stopped at a traffic light, and a car pulled up alongside us. I can't remember the model or the color of the car. I guess it was more like a minivan than a car, come to think of it. But either way, it was bigger than a normal car. I am in the passenger seat and my friend is driving. The light changes color and I look at the car and the people in it. I got a really weird vibe from one of the guys in the car, so I just kept watching. I couldn't put my finger on what was weirding me out about these guys at first, but then I noticed one of the guys in the back seat. I could do little else but wonder what was bugging me. Then it dawned on me. The reason I felt something was off about one of the guys was because I couldn't see the bottom half of his face. It was as if it was completely black, like it was missing. Why was it black? I wondered. I thought I was hallucinating or if I was just overtired. Still, I kept on looking at the guy. I was curious. I locked eyes with him and then the car sped away before the lights changed. They ran the red light. In the split second that I saw that guy, his eyes flashed my way, and I had never seen a look of such desperation before or since. His eyes seemed to scream at me. He pressed his face against the window, and then it was like he was pulled backwards before the car sped off. When he was close against the window, I realized that the black thing I saw was tape covering his mouth. It all happened in less than a couple of seconds. The look of fear in his eyes stayed with me. I was deeply concerned. The minivan sped away into the night towards the wharf. I had heard rumors that the Yakuza used to hang out there and are responsible for some of the missing person cases in the area and for some of the bodies that are found washed up in the wharf over the years. Some people say that the wharf is haunted because of this too. It's always been known as a kind of test of courage to head there at night on weekends, but I have never spoken to anyone who went down there on a weekday night. We don't know what goes on there when the town sleeps, but I think I saw a glimpse of it that night. Could this be a prank? I really hope that what I saw was. I guess that's the only outcome I can live with. I didn't get the license plate, and we didn't follow the van. It just happened so quickly. Now I am older. I know that if I saw it again, I would be more proactive. This weighs heavily on me still to this day. I told the police a day or two after it happened, and I never heard back from them. When I think back to that dark summer night and those split seconds that I saw the man with desperation in his eyes and a tape covering his mouth, I can't help but shudder. This happened when I was in university, when I was driving home from a trip. The roads were very dark as I was in the countryside. The mountains and trees were blotting out the moonlight. All of a sudden, my engine began to splutter and slow until it eventually came to a stop. I am not the best with cars, so rather than waste time with guesswork, I figured that I'd call roadside rescue. I had that as part of my insurance. There was nothing much that I could do except wait for someone to arrive. It was creepy out there. The forests are home to strange noises at night. And after a little while, a bright light lit up the road and it was aimed at my car. I thought that the roadside rescue were early. I couldn't believe my luck. But when the light got a little closer, I realized that it wasn't them. It was strange. It didn't look like the light of normal headlights, and it stopped about 50 meters in front of my car and didn't move. It was getting a bit weird now. Unlike standard headlights, which are divided into two light sources. Whatever was in front of me had only one source of light. The light was so bright, it didn't seem safe at all. It seemed not to have the same purpose as a light bulb. I didn't like it, and then I saw them. 3 people approaching from behind the light. These people were very thin and very tall, pushing 2 meters, I'd say, 6'6". And as they moved from behind the light to in front of it, I could see the lines in their faces. Their faces were really gaunt and long. There was something off-putting about these 3 people that I couldn't quite put my finger on at first. But then I realized what it was. It was their style of clothes and hair and etc. They looked like they were from another time period. It was like they had been wearing the same clothes since the 70s. They were wearing chinos, polo shirts, stuff like that, and they approached my car and one of them spoke to me. Once again, I noticed that there was something slightly off-putting about these people. When they spoke, it had all the wrong intonations. He was emphasizing the wrong syllables, and I'm not quite sure how to explain it, but it wasn't right. It made listening to him difficult, yet I detected no accent to indicate they were foreign. "Where did you come from?" he asked. I chose to remain silent before answering that. I didn't want to let these strangers know about my car's engine trouble because essentially, I couldn't get away from them. "You have trouble with your car. I can fix it," he said. It scared me that he knew that. I said thanks but no thanks, and that I had already called roadside rescue. The man was persistent. I kept refusing. I really didn't want to speak to these guys out here in the woods alone. Then, the strangest thing happened. My thoughts felt like they were changing, like I had to mentally wrestle with myself to not allow them to work on my car. It felt like my mind was being changed for me. I started to wonder if maybe they could help. Maybe it would be a good idea to unlock the door and let them in. I got out of my car, half of my mind screaming at the other half, imploring me to get back into the car and get the doors locked again. But I couldn't fight it. I felt like I should go with these men, go where they wanted me to go. And I started following them towards the light. I was completely transfixed. I didn't need to think for myself. I tried to raise my arm, but I couldn't because I wasn't in control of it. I wanted to be scared, but this calm voice inside my head reassured me that there was nothing to fear. That part of me, that was still me, was screaming at me to do anything to get away from these men, but my internal voice was getting quieter and quieter. While I was walking towards that bright light, my phone started to ring. It must be the roadside rescue people, and it snapped me back to reality, and I was in control again. I was able to answer the phone, and I was back. I knew that I needed that phone to be on. Something about that call saved me. I must have explained my location in about 10 different ways to the rescue people. I really wanted to be accurate. I didn't want to be out here anymore. And while I was on my phone, the men were trying to get me to take up their offer for help. I hated the way they towered over me, and their faces were so pale and thin, like barn owls. I refused. I had to. I ran back to my car with the phone clamped to the side of my head, and that was when they began to get angry. They were screaming and shouting by the side of my door. I began to doubt myself. Usually, I would never refuse a kind favor, as I would be willing to do the same for someone in my situation. But given what just happened, I knew that I couldn't trust these men. They were trying to express anger, but it was like the concept was entirely new to them. And eventually, they gave up and headed back towards that beam of light. And before leaving, they did this weird thing simultaneously in front of my car. They placed an open palm on their foreheads and then slapped it, as if you're doing a high five to your own head. Their fingers were long and spider-like, and I don't have a clue what that gesture is supposed to mean. The light then shot backwards at tremendous speed, and then it was gone. Shortly after, the roadside rescue team showed up. The guy went to check the engine and couldn't find a single fault with it. He put my keys back in the ignition, turned it, and my engine started without issue. That really freaks me out because I know that the engine stopped. I hated it, but I needed to get out of the woods. I headed into the direction the light shot off, and I managed to get home without further incident. However, when I woke up the next day, I had a really strange rash all over my body. I went to see a dermatologist, and she couldn't figure out the cause of the rash. I think the rash went away after 10 days or so with a cream and ointment that I got from the dermatologist. I'm sure that rash was related to the bright light and those 3 men. Well, I say men, but I'm not entirely convinced of that fact. And about 2 years after this happened, I was at a party, and a woman said that when she was driving in the mountains, in the same area I was, she and her boyfriend said that they saw something similar to what I did. She said on 2 occasions, she saw beams of light flying across the night sky. Some people snickered at that, but I didn't. It felt all too real. Did we have some sort of encounter with a UFO? It must be really hard to believe this, but I wish I could just, give you my memories or my mind for a while. The fear those 3 tall men instilled in me was otherworldly. That said, I don't know why my mind changed to trusting them, like a light being switched on or off. It lingers in my thoughts often, and it was truly disturbing. And here are the top comments from my last video. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.